Good evening, folks, and welcome to the live stream. I hope you're all very well this evening. Hope you had a nice weekend and you're ready for some more crazy stuff this week. Of course, Parliament is in recess, so we won't be talking too much about what's happening in Parliament because, well, there's nothing happening in Parliament. But that doesn't mean that there isn't stuff happening in politics, and of course, there is a lot going on. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening with immigration. It seems the Labour Party are doubling down on acting tough. Tommy Robinson has been released on bail. And a few other stories related to also, of course, what's happening in Gaza and Palestine. So I want to start off with this story here, guys, which was interesting. This is from a newspaper called Unheard. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It is a bit ambiguous. Let me just close a few tabs here. Sorry. It is a little bit ambiguous. I think it's more to the right than to the left. It's more... Tommy is out. Yes, Tommy is out. Tommy. Okay. Anyway, this article says here, this is from a guy called James Medway, who's saying that Stormers one hope, Labour must pivot to the right. Oh, God. Yes. Pivot to the right. In the way it worked so well for the Conservatives. This would be a disaster. Now, I don't know if this guy is a mole. He wants Labour to fail. Let me close this. I'm not going to read the whole article. It's really long, but I just want to read the last part, which is quite interesting. It says here, this vision of Labour, so pivoting to the right, in principle, leverage that support to claw its way out of the current political chaos as the dominant partner in future government coalitions. With a new Corbyn-Sultana party and the Greens on its left, the political logic for the Labour Democratic Party, he's comparing the current Labour Party to the Democrats in the US, is clear. There's a route out of the Stormer quagmire. It would require a conclusive break. A break to the left inside the party has been made impossible. A break to the right is all that remains. And in the article, he goes on about how, he should basically Labour should abandon any idea of winning back support from the left. They should just let Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana form their own party and just let them suck up, hoover up the left-wing votes, and that Labour should pivot to the right. It's not about left and right. It's about having a vision. That's how you win. How did Boris Johnson win in 2019? His vision was get Brexit done. Some of the policies were, levelling up. That's not a right-wing policy. Building 40 new hospitals. That's not a right-wing policy. What Boris Johnson was not selling right-wing populism. He was not selling right-wing politics. He was selling a vision. And people like that vision. It was a terrible vision. It was not a real vision. He wasn't going to get Brexit done. Get Brexit done meant nothing. But people associated with Boris Johnson with that, and they associated getting Brexit done as moving on from the saga of Brexit. Of course, the UK has not moved on. It won't move on until it rejoins the European Union. But this is the whole thing that Boris Johnson ran on. And he was successful. He had a vision. I've said before, one of the problems when it came to the Labour Party in 2019 was, of course, there was a massive split in the party. The right of the party wanted to go in one direction and the left of the party wanted to go in another direction. There were a lot of really good policies, but unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn was not good at selling those policies. He was not very good at interviews with the media. He was not able to use the media in the same way as Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage are able to use the media. So this really hamstrung him, and I think it's not about left and right. It's about selling a vision. Have to go more to the right. What the actual fuck? Yes, this is insane. No, and this will be terrible advice. But unfortunately, maybe Morgan McSweeney is listening to this, going, maybe we should try and pander to Nigel Farage. Nobody's ever tried that before. Maybe that would work. Let's try and out Farage. Surely we would be the first party to try and do that. And of course, people would look at us as the adults in the room. People would consider us as reasonable. So if we're going to talk about immigration, people would vote for our party over Nigel Farage because we're the reasonable party. No, It doesn't work like that. I said before, you need to improve the lives of ordinary people. You need to demonstrate, you have to show that to them. You have to communicate that to them. And if people feel that their lives are getting better, they're going to stick with you. They're not going to take the chance with Nigel Farage, because people are going to take the chance with Nigel Farage if they don't feel that the situation is improving. Let's give Nigel a chance. In the same way as the same thing we heard when it came to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is a bit rough around the edges, but let's give Boris a chance. Then you saw how that turned out. It'll be the exact same language when it comes to Farage. Brad, thank you so much for that super chat. The government are so afraid of Farage. If he said the government don't have enough sex, the next day Downing Street would be live streaming a cabinet orgy. I don't want to see that. I don't want that image in my mind, okay? Yes. Now we all have that image in our minds. Thank you so much, Brad. Oh, God. Most people I know thought his policies would asset strip them, and thought that he was a terrorist supporter. The truth, I heard it. They had something they thought they would lose. Yeah, people thought, okay, and this was something that Jeremy Corbyn should have pushed back on. If he didn't present a narrative, somebody else would. And the media created a narrative that he was a terrorist supporter, he was a supporter of the IRA, he would get the UK out of NATO, he would give up the nuclear deterrent, all of these things. Like, maybe or maybe not, but it was his position. He was in the place to step in and say, these are the actual policies I support. These are the policies I do not support. But he allowed the narrative to be set by somebody else. And he refused to go on, do interview. I'm not going to rehash Jeremy Corbyn and the media again. Okay, I've done that before, and you're probably all tired of it. But you need to have, you need to have a vision. You need to be able to transmit that vision to people. If you don't, what does Keir Starmer actually represent? Does anyone know? And this is not me taking pot shots at Keir Starmer. What does he actually represent? Because we know what Nigel Farage represents: anti-immigration. What do the Conservatives represent? I do not know. They want to get out of the ECHR, something like that. The Greens, we know that they represent the environment, they represent the working class, that's what they're trying to push at the moment. The SNP, they represent Scottish independence. Plaid, they represent Welsh devolution. There are independent MPs, we know what they represent. So we have a general, the Liberal Democrats, how could I forget about them? They represent middle of the road. Okay, they're not on the left, they're not on the right, they're in the centre. They're like friendly Tories. Urban Legends, thank you so much for that super chat. Labour Friends of Israel destroyed him from within. This whole approach, thanks for that super chat. I think there's definitely merit to that, because there was an opportunity to lay out a table, to lay out a plan when it came to Gaza, and then he said, well, we'll accept a Palestinian state if Israel stop attacking, stop the bombing. So the conditions were not the Palestinian people deserve a state. It's, well, we think they should have one if somebody else does something. So it was determined. There was basically a veto by Israel in that, and that's not a true idea of self-determination. Fixing the country. That's the vision. Fixing the country. Okay, but you need also to, and you're right, Stefan, the idea, the vision was, we're going to fix the country. We're going to rebuild Britain. But people want to see the building taking place. And unfortunately, this week there was news that there's a lack of raw materials. Literally a lack of raw materials to build the homes, the affordable homes that Angela Rayner wants to construct. Of course, part of this is down to Brexit. Everything is more expensive now. or a lot of things are more expensive, and it's difficult to get the workers because of Brexit as well. So houses are going to be more expensive. If it's more difficult to build houses, it's going to be more expensive. Those houses are going to be more expensive. There was talk about 10% of one new construction site having affordable housing. 10%. And what is affordable? Does anyone actually know what affordable means? Because affordable in the past meant you could actually buy it. But affordable today means, well, you could buy it if you, are an MP. Do you think the rise of the smaller, more granular parties necessitates a rethink of first past the post system? Yes, I do. If we have a true democracy, we need to rethink who gets into the driving seats. Yes. Unfortunately, we're not hearing much about first past the replacement for first past the post proportional representation. We're not hearing much about that. Labour had said that there was talk about introducing it in the first parliament. Okay, the first parliament is just 1 year in, but we're not hearing much about a changeover to proportional representation. One of the arguments against PR was that, well, it would allow Nigel Farage to get into power. Okay, well, that argument has gone. It was like milk in the sun. It aged like milk in the sun. And I had said, look, even if Nigel Farage could get in under PR, it would also help other smaller parties like the Greens and maybe the Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana party. So you would have people voting for parties that they actually believe in, parties that represent their opinion, as opposed to holding your nose and voting against the incumbent in some cases. Affordable means £400,000 a day today, unfortunately. Doesn't sound very affordable, does it, Oliver? My parents' first house was £300. 300,000 or £300? Some people bought their homes, there was a meme on the internet. It was like, they bought their home for like £200 and a packet of strawberries or something like that. And a handful of strawberries. AN98, thank you so much for that super chat. Is comparing Farage to Hitler no longer hyperbole? No, isn't he being compared to Jimmy Savile at the moment? No, it's not. He's being compared to Jimmy Savile. He's on the side of Jimmy Savile. That's the argument being put forward by Labour. Look, I don't like this sort of dirty politics, but if Reform are getting into this sort of game, and the Conservatives have been doing it for decades, then maybe Labour need to get down and dirty too. The Democrats have said when they go low, we go high. That hasn't really worked when it comes to Donald Trump. So I think, while I don't agree with this type of politics, you have to play the game. A bit like Game of Thrones, you play the game or you die. And when it comes to politics, if Farage is getting dirty, you have to get dirty too, because he's not going to play clean. And we've seen it already with the most recent example being the one with Anna Sanwar in Scotland, the Labour leader in Scotland. Them taking a clip of his speech to Pakistani community in Scotland and running it as a clip of him claiming that Pakistani people are more important than British people, which was completely false. And Assange demanded an apology. Nigel Farage refused. But the damage had been done at that stage. So, you have to, once again, I don't agree with it, but if they're playing dirty and you try to play clean in this day and age, it doesn't work. Who's popping? Thank you so much for that super chat. Very kind of you. When are we going to address the elephant in the room? Russia and Belarus are flooding EU with migrants to destabilize us. This is factual and part of a hybrid war. So I don't know. I haven't been following this, so I can't respond to it because a lot of the migration is coming from. So I don't know the situation in Eastern Europe. So I'll be honest about that. I don't know the situation. But in Southern Europe, a lot of people are coming in from North Africa. And Europe used to have an agreement with Gaddafi. And then that fell apart after Gaddafi fell apart, literally. So now Libya doesn't have a functioning government. It has two governments, it seems. One in the east and one in the west, and they're at war, I believe, at the moment still. So there isn't a proper functioning government, and there's chaos in Libya. The European Union have been trying to send money to countries to try and stabilize them in some ways, but it's not really working. And with climate change, we're going to see more and more people. Would Russia and Belarus be doing something like this? Yes, of course. They want to destabilize Europe, and they want to use whatever tools they have available to them. So I would not be surprised. I don't know about this. I haven't been following it, but I have seen pictures online of the border between Belarus and some European countries, and how barbed wire is going up to keep migrants out, and some migrants are trying to get in. Now, I don't know if these are people who are legitimate or not. There is talk about Russian operatives being involved in this as well. Some of them may be coming in. They all have to be checked and vetted. And then if anyone is engaging in some sort of illegal activity, they should be arrested and deported if possible. But of course, we don't really have an agreement with Russia. So I'll definitely look into that. So thanks for the super chat about that. Brad, Jacob Rees-Mogg's first house was 20 shillings. Shillings or guineas? He bought it for a five bob note. Thanks for that. Co-host Dylan is going to answer some questions tonight. He gets excited, I'm sorry. How's poppin'? EU nations pulled out of Africa, and Russia went into the vacuum. This is a hybrid war. We need to get real here. I promise I'll look into that. And I'll definitely... There is a lot of media coming out from Eastern Europe, so I will look into that, and I will consider doing a video on that, because it is something I know of, but I don't know enough about it to respond to it. So I'm sorry if I can't say any more about it at this stage. I heard about this in the past, says Frederick. And I'm not dismissing. I would not trust Putin as far as I could throw him, and the president of Belarus as well. They will use whatever tactics they can to destabilize. Rees-Mogg, Englishman's home is his castle. Where is Nanny? Read me a bedtime story and all that. Pretty much, yeah. I can tell what Robespierre made. You're literally farting sparks. I love your I've never heard that. I think that's a compliment, is it? It's either a compliment or it's a very dangerous condition to have. Thanks for that. Jacob Rees-Mogg's first house had a parking for 2 penny farthings. Now we're going to be we're going to be attacking Jacob Rees-Mogg tonight, and we'll move on. Okay, guys, I want to show you this. This is an interesting clip from the Tories in Scotland. Yes, there are Tories in Scotland. I'm going to move on to the other stories, but I just wanted to raise a few funny stories here. This is a Tory in Scotland. His name is Andrew Bowie. I think no, he's not the leader of the Tories. Does anyone know who the leader of the Tories in Scotland is? Anyway, well, let's have a listen to what he had to say.
In Haven on the east coast, looking out into the North Sea, this town and the community, like so many others across West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, and indeed across the northeast of Scotland, so dependent on the oil and gas industry for its economic survival, its economic future. And out there behind me in the North Sea are millions of barrels of untapped potential in fossil fuels that could secure this country's energy security, secure hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Okay, we know what happens when it comes to oil that's extracted in the oil and gas extracted in the North Sea. It's sold on the international market. Now, are the Tories suggesting that the oil and gas industry in the North Sea is nationalised and that the oil and gas is not sold on the international market? Because then you would have energy security. But it's not, because it's been sold on the international market. So this is like Liz Truss once again. We need to drill. We need to frack. They don't care about the consequences for the environment, of course, but also they're just lying to people, because this will be sold on the international market. So if the price goes up, ordinary people will pay more. This isn't going to help Britain. It's certainly not going to help Scotland. If you had an independent Scotland, I don't know if Andrew Boy would support that, but an independent Scotland could decide, actually, we're going to not sell it on the international market. We're actually going to nationalise this, and we will sell it first to the people of Scotland, and then we will sell it on the international market. But we will decide. But as far as I know, and the Scots can confirm this in the chat, energy is not a devolved matter. So the Scottish government has no control over this. This is Westminster, and if Westminster decides we're going to issue more license, or we're not going to issue more license, there's nothing really the Scottish government can do about it. But if Scotland was independent, then it could do something about it. Can't refine it here though, even if it's nationalised. Thanks for that, Urbanize. So there isn't an industry to refine it. Yeah, you'd need to build an industry to refine it. So energy is a reserved matter. There we go. I'm annoyed about water. Okay. Now, I just wanted to highlight that one. That was a sort of, the Tories trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, as always. Okay, I want to show you this clip here from a guy called Paul, who got a bit owned by Ben Kentish. Ben, I'm not a huge fan of Ben, but this was a funny story here. Hey, whoops, what happened there? Okay, bring it back.
We all know the facts, who carry knives in this country and who doesn't. I'm not saying white people don't, because they do. But
then
when you've got
it's like
the old saying, not every terrorist is not every terrorist is Islamic, but a majority of terrorist offences are Islamic.
But what do we do with that information? Do we then avoid Muslim people on the tube? Do we steer clear of certain communities that we think are carrying knives? What do we do with that, Paul? Because that's just stereotyping.
I don't think it's information, and information is knowledge, and you can avoid certain situations and scenarios.
What you mean is avoid certain people, isn't it?
Well,
that's what you mean.
To do that, if you're going to go to an area where there's a high possibility that you could be, I don't know, like walking down the street with a piece of jewellery and you can get knifed or something, you'd avoid it, wouldn't you not?
Right, so if you're on the tube and you know that statistically most bombings on the tube have been carried out by Muslims...
I don't go on the tube.
All right, but if you're on a train then, or somewhere else where there might be a terror attack, and you see a Muslim person, what you think? Well, actually, statistically now, that's racist. It's
not racism.
That's racial stereotyping. It's racial profiling.
It's called being aware and conscious of your surroundings.
It's not really.
But then what do you do with that information? Okay, we'll get to the crescendo of the call in just a moment. But like this is the thing that Rupert Lowe and others have been saying. We need information on who is committing crimes. It's okay for the government to know which ethnic minorities are committing crimes. That's okay. But why would the public need this information? Like, what can the public do with that information? What use is it? Because as Paul was pointing out here, well, if I had this information, then I could avoid certain people. But we can't always avoid certain people. As Ben Kentish has pointed out, if you're on the train and there are certain people on the train, what are you going to do? Are you going to get off because those people are on the train? Are you going to demand that the train stop and have these people removed because they're on the train? Because you believe that they are more likely to commit an offence or to commit a crime, to blow up the train or something like that? Is that what you do? You live in a constant fear of there's a Muslim over there. That guy is probably going to explode at any moment. Or there's a Muslim woman over there. I don't know. She's going to stab me or something. I don't know. You can't live your life like that. It's important for the government to have statistics that they can, which groups are committing more crimes? What can we do about that? Should we increase policing in those communities? Should we have an outreach? Should we focus more on integration? What should we do? It's important for the government, local government, national governments to understand these things. But it's completely useless to ordinary people. And this is not about hiding information. It's just useless info. It's actually worse, because if you have all this information presented to you and you start acting on it, then you're not going to interact with people. And you need to interact with people. You can't live in a bubble.
Is it because the chances of, in your situation, that Muslim person being a terrorist are absolutely minuscule? So if you treat them as if they are, that is racial profiling. And what about all the crimes committed by white people?
Serial killers, if you look through history, serial killers are more likely to be white people, especially in the West. So I'm more likely to be a serial killer than, somebody from another ethnic minority or an ethnic background. I'm more likely to be a serial killer. So if you see me on the tube, you would probably say, well, that guy is probably a serial killer, so I better not interact with him. Oh, look, he's fallen over. Maybe he needs help, but I better not help, because he may be going to stick a bag over my head and take me back to his apartment or whatever and carry out all sorts of torture and stuff. It's insane. But you can, once again, it's important for the government, local government, police, to have an understanding of a breakdown by ethnic group if necessary. But it's useless for ordinary people. Max the serial killer. Okay, well, we don't want to run with that one. That's it. I'm avoiding Mad Max if he visits Scotland. I promise I'm not a serial killer. But then that's what a serial killer would say anyway, isn't it? Okay, guys, let's move on. I want to cover this story before we take our break. What is the government doing about immigration? Of course, they are doubling down on, well, we need to be tougher on immigration. So, oh goodness, this is not going to end well. Let me see if, we can see that. So, migrant detention will begin in a matter of days, says Cooper. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper is now joining Sky News breakfast, discussing a new migration returns deal with France. She said that these are the new rules that will come into force on Wednesday, with detention expected to be in a matter of days. The one-in, one-out pilot scheme, which allows the UK to send some people who have crossed the Channel back to France in exchange for asylum seekers with ties to Britain, was signed last week. Cooper said the first step would be detaining people because they will be detained until they are removed to France, and we expect those detentions to start in a matter of days. It's a pilot program. It'll start with a number being lower, and then will build up. So the idea behind this one in, one out scheme is that somebody who has a right to be in Britain will be allowed in, while somebody who has no right will be deported back to France. Now, Zoe Gardner has been explaining the problem with this, because the more people that go through this program will result in, well, nobody really crossing the Channel. So how are you going to get people? How are you going to, if the program works, it will fail in a sense, because it's dependent on removing people who have crossed the Channel in small boats. So you're supposed to take people who've crossed the Channel in small boats, take them back to France, and then somebody who's sitting in France will be allowed to go to get free passage, a safe passage to the UK. But if you stop the boats completely, then no one will be crossing and no one will be able to get in via safe route. Now, I don't see that happening, because there are thousands crossing every year. But it's not going to. Okay, if one of the 50 in max is max, not what they're printed in the. It's one out of 50. Sorry, it's one out 50. 50 in max, not what they printed in the article. Sorry, I didn't see. I wasn't able to read that correctly. So it's one out 50 in. But that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I don't think it's going to work. Thanks, Alistair, for that. I don't think it's going to work either way. You need to create a safe route for people to make this. If people think there's a very small chance that I will be detained and deported back to France, then people are not going to be deterred. They've crossed all of Europe. They've crossed the Mediterranean in some cases. They've gone through Belarus in some cases. these people are not going to be deterred by the possibility of being returned to France. And we know, if you're returned to France, then you can just get on the next dinghy and go again. The racists have the wrong accents. So there's a bit more on this, the explanation of this one in, one out that Yvette Cooper is working on or trying to put forward.
The one-in, one-out migration deal is now in force. But what do we know about it? Small boat migrants will be sent back to France in exchange for asylum seekers with a link to the UK. The concept is being trialled and it will be monitored month by month. It will run until June 2026, and after that, the UK and French governments will decide whether it's working. What we don't know yet is how many people this scheme could send back to France, and the Home Secretary wouldn't tell us.
Okay, I think the only way this could work is politically, optics. So if the government, and I don't know if this is actually going to work, but this is just a speculation. If they're able to film people being loaded onto boats and sent back to France, and that's all they show, this will be sold as a win. So it's about convincing people who are going to vote for Nigel Farage, but it might be people who are Reform UK curious. So people who are like, well, we want the government to do something. I don't want to throw my support behind Nigel Farage yet, but I want the government to do something on immigration. And this could work. Look, politically, once again, it's about optics. It's not actually about fixing the problem. You fix the problem by creating safe routes. But it could actually create a sort of optic of, and we saw it with Trump. Trump is talking about sending 250 people to Rwanda. He sent a number of people to El Salvador. There were planes filled up to send people to other places as well. So it's about the optics. You saw pictures of migrants being loaded onto aircraft, a few months back, and Donald Trump doing a bit of a victory lap, and his supporters loved that. And people on the right were like, "This is great! Finally we have a president who's deporting people." Like, it was the optics. We're talking about very small numbers of people, and I think this could work in the same way, as long as Farage isn't able to upset the apple cart, and I think that's probably what's going to happen. So it may work for a while. Look, we're actually deporting people. We're sending people back to France. As long as you show only that, you don't show the boats, then it will work. But I think it's going to be, once again, it will work on an optics level. It won't actually work in practice. But that's what it's all about, it seems, unfortunately. Menu Badenoch said it won't work, and she knows. Thanks, Christy. Yeah, she knows. Smelly bad cook. Kemi Badenoch is a joke. I don't know how much longer she's going to stay in her position. She's not really making any inroads. Reform UK are basically replacing the Conservatives at this stage. The Conservative Party could sort of whittle away and die eventually before the next election. They have held on to, there was an interesting vote recently, a by-election, where they did hold on to, they won a seat actually from an independent. But if you look at the breakdown, the Green Party did field a candidate, I think. The independent candidate was gone. The Liberal Democrat vote went up, I believe. So it was a case of the Conservatives were extremely lucky. All of the stars aligned perfectly and they were able to win the seat. But it wasn't really a win. And of course, turnout was much lower than before. So they're, of course, presenting it as a win. And they have, won a few council seats. But the council elections are very different to the national elections. And we'll have to wait and see. I wouldn't write the Tories off completely, because they could turn things around if they come up with a new strategy, if they actually come up with real policies. But we're not hearing that at the moment. And Kemi Badenoch is just doubling down on immigration. The worst thing they could be talking about.
We've also been clear that the reasons for not setting out the numbers is, firstly, the numbers will vary and we want them to increase, and we have not set an overall figure for the programme.
The Conservatives say this won't stop people coming over in small boats and it's tinkering around the edges. They say Labour should bring back the Rwanda plan that never...
Oh, God. Oh, my goodness, the Rwanda plan. Do you remember the Rwanda plan, guys? Wasn't that wonderful? The Rwanda scheme. The one that was supposed to send people to Rwanda, but ended up not sending more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than actual asylum seekers. And those who eventually did go were paid £3,000 each to go. It was deemed unlawful by the Supreme Court. The UK government were saying, yes, Rwanda is a safe country, while the Home Office was granting asylum to people from Rwanda. An absolute joke. And then finally, of course, the icing on the cake was £750 million was spent trying to buy up accommodation for asylum seekers to go to Rwanda. And then what happened? Well, the Rwandan government sold them off. The Labour government I think have stopped some of the money going. Some money is still going because it's still part of an agreement. But it was an absolute waste of money. I've often asked this question. Why do the Conservatives in particular never have to pay any consequences? And when I mean pay, I mean literally pay. Like, they spent £750 million. They gave £34 billion to Dido Harding. And nobody's had to pay the consequences. Dido Harding hasn't had to come back and say, here's the cash. Sorry. I'm not like, what's his name, from Dumb and Dumber, filling it with IOUs. It's, here's the cash back, okay? I shouldn't have spent it this way, but I had a bit of a whip round, and they belong in prison, yes. And then when it comes to the Conservatives, £750 million was spent on the Rwanda scheme when it was unlawful. Like, don't they have lawyers? Some of them are actually lawyers in the Conservative Party. None of them decided, actually, let's check to see if it's lawful to send people to a country that is deemed unsafe. Actually, it's not. Can you imagine if they had to reach into their pockets and pay the £750 million back to the taxpayer? Can you imagine if they had to go to their donors on hands and knees and go, please, we have to pay this money back or we'll end up in prison or something? No. Imagine if governments had to be more accountable when they spend money. I see the chat is going in a different direction. So let's take a short comedy moment, guys, before we get to the next story, which is, of course, Tommy Robinson. But hope you enjoyed this before we jump into that.
How to eat a club sandwich with proper etiquette. I consider myself something of an expert on eating, so let's crack into this. Okay, so he's going to show us how to eat it now, charmingly. It looks nice. Oh, look at his little fucking sauces, aren't they nice? Right, let's get into it. What are you doing with them? Put them fucking down! You must not use weaponry against a sandwich. Pick it up with your fucking hands. We must stop this overuse of forks. People would be staring at you eating a sandwich like that. If somebody sees you eating a sandwich like that, they're gonna fucking rob you. Pick it up with your hands and shove it into your mouth. If the people around you can't handle looking at that, they'll be fucking no good to you in an emergency. I'm sorry, but if I'm going into battle, I'm not bringing people who fucking make me eat with my mouth closed. You can use your hands for stuff. It's fine, just fucking clean them. They're not made of poison. Hands are very civilized. Look at a shark. Doesn't have any hands. Why? Because probably he's a cunt. Follow me. I'm delicious.
Is that why sharks don't have hands? Okay. Urban Legends, thank you so much for that super chat. The right always chances their arm, the centre don't. Yeah, maybe. That's an interesting point there. So speaking of which, speaking of chancing your arm, Tommy Robinson bailed after arrest over alleged assault at railway station. So Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Luxley Lennon, was arrested. Why did he change his name? Anyway, was arrested after footage emerged appearing to show him backing away and walking back and forth next to a motionless man. The 42-year-old far-right activist was arrested in Luton Airport on Monday evening in connection with an incident which took place on the 28th of July. Footage on social media appeared to show Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Luxley Lennon, walking back and forth next to a man lying motionless on the ground. British Transport Police said on Tuesday that he has been released on police bail until the 2nd of September, while inquiries continue. He was arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm and taken into custody after arriving in the UK on a flight from Faro in Portugal. I asked the question at the time, why did he flee the scene? You know, if you're involved in some sort of altercation and the police arrive, you're supposed to stay there, no? You're not supposed to leave the scene. Now, I'm not saying it's a crime to leave the scene, but, you know, a normal citizen would stay. What did he do instead? He got on a plane and went to Portugal or Spain. I'm not sure which. In this article, it says Portugal. He's always on holiday for some reason. How does he afford to be on holiday all the time? Are you on holiday as much as Tommy Robinson? Tommy Robinson is surely, he keeps getting keeping his tan in place because he's always frigging in the south of Europe. This is, it's so strange for Brexit supporters, Brexiteers like Tommy Robinson. They hate Europe so much that they spend more time there than they do in their own country. And he has an Irish passport. How did he get that? How's it poppin'? Thank you so much for that super chat once again. Russia creates migrant crisis, works with criminal gangs and right-wing political parties all over Europe. These parties use migration as the weapon to get elected. They support Russia, and that's a valid point. We've already seen connections between right-wing parties in Britain with Russia, with Putin. We've seen it with, for example, in Italy here. A number of right-wing parties have had connections to the Kremlin, received money from the Kremlin. They have since then, since the war in Ukraine, they have distanced themselves somewhat from Putin and changed their rhetoric somewhat. Now they're starting to come back to the way they were before by saying, well, we should have peace, and maybe there's a huge level of corruption in Ukraine and we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine. And what about our own people? We should stop sending money in arms to Ukraine. We should be spending the money on our own people. These parties are pretty quiet when we're talking about poverty. They never say, well, we need to do something about poverty. We need to look after our people. No, they suddenly bring these things up. Same with the right-wing parties. And Farage has been constantly being referred to as a Putin puppet. I don't know how deep the connection goes between between Farage and Russia. But he's always been a dodgy individual when it comes to Russian influence. And then, of course, there was the Russia report that was not released by the UK government, the Tories. They decided not to release information. They decided not to investigate Russian influence. They decided not to investigate. Isn't that strange? We know that there's Russian influence, but they decided not to investigate for some reason. Would it be because it might look bad for the Conservative Party? Not just far-right parties, but even the Conservative Party. Remember, Boris Johnson played tennis with the wife of a former Putin minister, played tennis with her, and his party received £150,000. I've joked before, maybe she thought she was playing tennis with Boris Becker, but instead got Boris Johnson. That would have been pretty disappointment, and surely after that she would have asked for a refund, but didn't ask for a refund. Imagine if you paid £150,000 to play tennis with Boris Becker, and Boris Johnson turns up. You'd be like, hey, that's not right. I want my money back. Also, I don't think anyone would pay £150,000 to play tennis with Boris Becker. Brad, once again, thank you so much, Brad. Robinson is short enough that if he took the blue pill, what would be much longer than his height. Probably, yes. He'd be like a three-legged stool. Thanks for that. Tommy ran away. He did indeed. Anyway, moving on. What's happening with Israel and Palestine? Well, and the UK government's approach to this.
The young man being mourned here was shot and killed in southern Gaza. He was called Ahmed and spoke to Sky News days ago.
We are tired. We call upon God and upon you to show mercy to the people of Gaza, to end this war and to allow humanitarian aid in.
Our team met Ahmed as he was trying to find food. His death tells the story of a wider reality of the danger and despair that now defines life in Gaza. A group sheltering here from gunfire near an aid site. It's not clear who's firing the shots, but we hear reports every day of dozens of people dying trying to get food. This way is unsafe too. People fighting for food as it falls from the sky. Canada, now the latest country to join airdrop efforts.
But isn't this insane that Canada and other countries are dropping aid from aircraft because they can't get it in on by road? Like, when we think about airdrops, we think of, well, because there's an ongoing conflict or something, or it's unsafe for the Canadians, for example, in this case, to drive into Gaza or into that area. But Israel is supposed to be an ally. Israel is supposed to guarantee security. They're supposed to at least allow aid in. Like, Canada is an ally of Israel. How is it possible that Canada can't arrive with a truck of aid and say, let's go in ourselves? No, they're not being permitted to enter. So they're actually flying over and dropping aid this way, along with other countries.
I wish they would just deliver aid through the crossing. This is not a humane practice.
This aid brings death to people.
The recent release of videos showing the emaciated state of 2 Israeli hostages has triggered international outrage and anger. Despite opposition from hostage families, it's thought the Israeli Prime Minister is planning to expand ground operations in Gaza. A senior official from his office reporting the objective is now to occupy the entire strip.
So at the beginning, the whole thing was, well, this is not an occupation. What we're going to do is we're going to take the hostages back. We're going to attack Hamas in order to get the hostages back. And now Netanyahu is saying it's actually not about the hostages. It's about destroying Hamas. And now it's not actually about destroying Hamas. It's about occupying all of Gaza. So this is basically an annexation of Gaza. This is what they wanted to do from the very beginning. There are people within the Netanyahu government who've been saying this since the very beginning. It's so strange that you have to go. I've seen footage from Al Jazeera. You actually have to go to outlets like Al Jazeera or Middle Eastern outlets, media outlets, to get some of this information, because we're not hearing about it. When do you ever hear an interview with one of the far right ministers in Netanyahu's government? Everything is sort of filtered through. So okay, well, it's just a minister. It's a junior minister. They're just part of the government. They're not really. It's not the prime minister that's talking. And now you actually have the prime minister saying we've decided on a full occupation of Gaza. That's an annexation. So where do the people go? Honestly, where are the people of Gaza supposed to go at this stage?
The Prime Minister gave little away during a cabinet meeting.
We must continue to stand together and fight together to achieve the war goals we have set, all of them: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and the assurance that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. Later this week, I will convene the cabinet to instruct the IDF on how to achieve these 3 goals.
But many in Israel, including Mr. Netanyahu's predecessor, are calling for the war to end now.
I think the whole war in the last several months, probably more than few months, is what we call a war of deception. It has nothing to do with the security interests of Israel. It has nothing to do with the future of the hostages, probably risking them. And it's basically a war to hold together the coalition and to save Netanyahu from the day of reckoning that will come inevitably when the war stops.
Will the war stop? This is the thing. You know, one thing is to say that, well, when the war ends, Netanyahu will be deposed, Netanyahu's government will fall. But if he says what we're going to do is we're going to annex Gaza, we're going to have a security presence there, then there will always be a war because there will be people resisting it. So they say, well, we have to maintain this conflict because there are people fighting back. This is the only guy who can really put pressure on Netanyahu, and of course he's completely useless.
Barak is one of 600 retired Israeli officials and security chiefs who've written an open letter calling on Donald Trump to step in and pressure Benjamin Netanyahu to end this war. So far, Donald Trump has stopped short of that, but he's once again expressed concern about hunger in Gaza.
Yeah, I'm concerned, yes, concerned. I could do something about it, but I prefer not to. Wasn't Donald Trump supposed to shake things up? Wasn't Donald Trump supposed to be a wrecking ball? But he's doing exactly the same as the previous presidents. You know, Israel is committing crimes against humanity. Israel is engaging in war crimes. And US presidents are like going, please, you know, show some restraint if you can. Okay? You know, don't go too much out of your way. But, you know, when you're blowing up a hospital, at least target it next door maybe or something like that, so we can sort of engage in some sort of plausible deniability, and then the IDF just blow up the hospital anyway. And then the US president comes out and says, well, you know, we need to see restraint on both sides. It's pathetic. So just sticking with that for one moment more, and then I'm going to, we're almost at the end of the stream for tonight, but there's another story I want to cover before we finish, apart from this one, when it comes to Gaza and Palestine. Number 10 declines to say if Palestine will be recognized with Hamas in power. If the people of Gaza, the people of Palestine, decide we actually want Hamas to run our country, isn't it up to them? Look, most people, and I'm no fan of Hamas, I think they're as terrible as Netanyahu. They're engaging in exactly the same type of behavior. They're genocidal like Netanyahu is. But if the Palestinian people want something like Hamas or Hamas itself, that's their choice, no? It's up to them to decide, not we decide for them. You know, this is not the Palestine Protectorate, the British Protectorate of Palestine again. Okay, it's the Palestinian people that need to decide. Like, how is it a sovereign state? We keep talking about how the Palestinians deserve to have a sovereign state. How is it a sovereign state if people on the outside are saying, well, we're going to select your leaders, or we're going to make sure that certain leaders are not, or certain parties are not able to run? That's not a democracy. So Stormer coming out and saying, yes, another condition, you're allowed to have a Palestinian state if Israel stop fighting, and you are allowed to have a Palestinian state if Hamas are not going to be part of that. It's like the Palestinian state is recognized and then there are elections. It's not like there are elections and then the Palestinian state is recognized. And if Hamas win, well, I'm sorry, the British government are not going to recognize it at that stage. So we're going to collectively punish all people because they voted for Hamas. Hamas has nothing to do with the West Bank. No, that's the Palestinian Authority are in the West Bank. But the West Bank would be part of a Palestinian state. So you can't just say, well, we're not going to allow the Palestinian state if Hamas are there. These actions, of course, are playing into the hands of Hamas. Every time Israel destroys infrastructure, every time it kills its civilians, it becomes a recruiting ground for Hamas or other organizations like Hamas in Gaza. They say, oh, your family has been killed. By who? By the Israelis. Oh, okay, then join us. We're going to fight. You have nothing left. You might as well join us. And then the cycle of death continues. Sorry to be so downbeat, but this is the reality of the situation. So I want to cover one final story here, which is interesting. It's the...
Good afternoon, and
the investigation into that submarine. Remember that submarine that was operated by a video game controller that imploded a couple of years ago? Well, some investigation into how that happened has come out.
A report into the Titan submersible disaster has found that OceanGate, the company that made the underwater vehicle, had critically flawed safety practices and used intimidation tactics to evade regulatory scrutiny. The submersible...
Sounds like something Elon Musk would do.
Experienced a catastrophic failure 90 minutes into the dive to the wreckage of the Titanic in June 2023, killing all 5 people on board. Now, a report from the US Coast Guard says their deaths were preventable and the vessel had an inadequate design, maintenance and inspection process. Well, the 2-year-long investigation resulted in a 300-page report which outlines contributing factors and makes 17 safety recommendations for future submersible oversight. Among the contributing factors...
It seems one of the reasons also is because it was not regulated like a normal submarine. So because it was a sort of private, they had used some sort of loopholes to get around the problem of having certain regulations in place. So if you want to go at certain depths, you need to follow certain regulations, from the Coast Guard or from the authorities. But it seems that they were able to get around these because they were probably saying it's not really a submarine. It's a type of boat that goes underwater. I'm being a bit damn, I've forgotten the term. Anyway, Alistair, thank you so much for that super chat. By the looks of it, 40 Lords has Starver a way out of what's started about recognizing Palestinian state last week, if I remember rightly. I don't know why he even bothered when he says we're going to add all these caveats. Thanks, Alistair. So yeah, there may be a way out of this for him, but what is the point in saying we're going to add a lot of caveats in order to recognize a state? The people of that state deserve that, or they don't.
Factors listed are OceanGate's inadequate design certification, maintenance and inspection process for the Titan. Allegations of toxic workplace culture at OceanGate.
Why is that so common recently? A toxic workplace culture. I heard the same thing about Tesla. I remember a story about a guy who was, I think he was getting married, and he asked Elon Musk for the weekend off because, he was getting married. And Elon Musk basically said, well, if you're going to take the weekend off, then don't come in on Monday. You have to work here. Even, you have to cancel your wedding or something in order to finish this project. We have to get this project done or whatever. Similar sort of thing it seems to be here.
An inadequate domestic and international regulatory framework for submersible operations and vessels of novel design. And
probably because these things are so rare that there isn't effective legislation to make sure that they're safe. Some of them are unmanned, so you probably have. I don't know if they try to sell it to the authorities as no. This is basically unmanned. It's just going to be controlled, so you don't need the same type of regulation. Maybe then they said, well, let's actually convert it into a tourist attraction.
Effective whistleblower process under the Seamen's Protection Act. Well, let's bring in Sky's Tom Cheshire, who is following the story. So, Tom, a pretty damning report and so many factors that contributed to this disaster.
Yeah, this is a long report and it's not afraid to point the finger at all. And most of that is on the design and construction of the Titan. This was a preventable tragedy, so this shouldn't have happened. And the Marine Board of Investigation said that
the guy was either an idiot or a psychopath, or both.
Mr. Stockton Rush, who was the CEO of OceanGate and the pilot on the Titan submersible, he died. They said that he exhibited negligence that contributed to the death of 4 individuals. They said had he not died, it was a potential criminal offence, which may have been subject to criminal liability. In terms of what went wrong with this submersible, they said the design and processing for Titan did not address many of the fundamental engineering principles involved. They didn't understand the expected life cycle, the cycle life of Titan's hull. They relied on a real-time monitoring system to assess the condition of that carbon fibre hull, but then they failed to conduct a meaningful analysis of the data provided by the system. They used that hull after a series of incidents that compromised the integrity of the hull and other critical components, and also the design and construction of the hull itself, that was not up to scratch. Along with that, one of the primary causal factors was a toxic workplace environment. They also go on to list other contributing causal factors, saying that the Chief Executive Officer, Stockton Rush, again, his sustained efforts to misrepresent Titan as indestructible, that provided a false sense of safety for passengers and regulators alike. So this is...
It's so ironic that they were going to to see the Titanic, and he was describing his submarine as indestructible. Of course, when it came to the Titanic, it was the media that described it as unsinkable, not the actual engineer. Or was it new? It was a white flag line. Peter, thank you so much for that super chat. If these tours are still going about Tommy Robinson, could book a trip. We can have a whip round to raise enough money to send Tommy. You know, if you can fit 4 people, you know, along with the driver, so you could have Tommy Robinson, maybe, I don't know, Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe could be another one. Ben Habib could go in it as well. So there's or maybe you should have a woman on board as well. You know, it wants to be an equal opportunity situation. So can you think of a woman that you'd like to have this as well? They have money. Of course, we're joking. We don't want to see anyone go on something like this. They have money, and they thought they could use their power to shun the safety calls. Well said, Christy. Yes. Yeah, it's like the sort of clips we're hearing from, what's his name, Peter Thiel, the head of Palantir, who's, you should see, he sounds like a psychopath. Yeah, we don't have to follow the rules. We're against the rules. We're going to break the rules. You know, we destroy companies. We're going to destroy the future for people. It's complete and utter psychopaths. Yes, they don't believe the rules apply to them, or the rules are there to be broken. But we're talking about safety rules. They're there to protect people's lives, to save lives. I hear the tours were to die for. You're very mean, Brad. Very mean.
Is an exhaustive report and makes all sorts of recommendations. It says that action has already been taken. Some of that is in terms of how the Coast Guard works with submersible companies. Some of it is in terms of the search and rescue. Remember, after the Titan went missing, there was 5 days of frantic search and rescue looking for that submersible before they eventually...
Wasn't it so I remember the comparison made with people who were lost in the Channel. You know, you had multimillionaires, maybe even billionaires, who were lost in this submarine for a game, like for fun. It was a fun activity. And mountains were moved to try and find them, to recover the bodies, to recover the submersible. And then at the same time, I think in the same week, a number of people lost their lives in the English Channel. And, well, it was how they lost their lives in the English Channel. And these were people who were desperate, who didn't want to get in a boat, but obviously felt the need to get in a boat in order to cross the Channel because there wasn't a safe route for them. They lost their lives, and there was no real attempt to recover. Of course, in the English Channel, it's practically impossible to recover the bodies, but there was very little talk about these people, their names. We didn't hear anything about them. There wasn't documentaries about them. What does it tell us about society? It's pretty sad, isn't it?
eventually found it some 500 meters away from the Titanic. And of course, that point that was mentioned earlier about whistleblower protection. Because of that toxic workplace, a lot of people tried to sound the alarm. They were shut down. They said they really need to improve that whistleblower protection in companies. So this was, in many ways, a one-off incident. This was a unique vessel, a unique company trying to do something pretty unique in itself. That ended in tragedy, but lessons here in this report are going to be applied to the wider industry to try and prevent a preventable tragedy like this happening again.
Billionaires will always do stupid things in order to pass the time. Instead of actually doing things like they used to do in the past was, I don't know, build universities or museums or housing for poor people. There were billionaires or multimillionaires at the time who did stuff like that. Philanthropy it's not a solution for government, but every little helps, I guess. So guys, we're almost at the industry, and I want to say thank you so much to everyone who came on tonight. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks to the moderators for doing a wonderful job as always, and thanks to everyone who smashed the like button. But before we go, we have our one for the road, so I hope you enjoy this. And if I don't see you, one moment. If I don't
protests
see you,
driven by.
One moment. If I don't see you between now and next time, well, hopefully I'll see you on Friday. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon. So let's enjoy this.
Online misinformation and stoked by the far right are spreading across the country. As a politician, how do you feel about that? Well, people are angry and they have legitimate concerns. But would you agree that much of that concern is in fact driven by rumours that are false and are being deliberately whipped up? Who am I to say that someone's concerns aren't legitimate? I mean, some of these migrants probably are criminals. The police have said there's no evidence of widespread criminal behaviour. Well, I've seen lots of evidence. What kind of evidence? Evidence of concern. Concern. Legitimate concern. I was asking about evidence. Well, it's evident people are concerned. We're getting reports that some of these protests are starting to turn violent. People are worried they might turn into riots. Well, people have concerns. Legitimate concerns. Exactly. And whilst I would never condone violence, I can understand why these people have concerns. Will you condemn the violence? I'd never condone violence, but I can understand why people are angry and want to make their voices heard. And look, if I lived in some of those places, then maybe I'd want to smash things up. But is violence ever the answer? No. Not for me. What? But for other people, well, I can understand it, which is why I'm putting out posts on social media designed to address their legitimate concerns. By promising to deal with the underlying causes? No, by agreeing with them and then implying that many migrants are criminals. Is that not just pouring petrol onto the fire? Only metaphorically. But people might literally try to burn things down. And I'd never condone that. But you won't condemn it. Look, what can I say? People have legitimate concerns. Exactly. Turning to another story, a number of elderly protesters were arrested this week after holding up placards in support of Palestine action. Lock them up and throw away the key. Are their concerns not legitimate? You're sounding a bit like a terrorist. Next up, as Donald Trump arrives in Scotland and immediately criticises Europe for letting in too many immigrants, we ask, when exactly is he going to go home then?
It's a little bit late, but still very good. We have a super chat from Peter. Thank you so much, Peter, before the end. Of course, they complain about the RNLI saving the immigrants. Yes. Instead, don't get me started on that. The only wonderful thing about that was when Farage was criticising the organisation, the support for it increased dramatically and they got a huge number of donations. So maybe Nigel Farage needs to come out and criticise the RNLI again. Could help their coffers a bit. So guys, have a great week. I'll see you on Friday, same bad time, same bad channel. Stay safe, take care, and good night.